Okay, looks like the recording is up and going. I'm Craig Kiger, Minnesota DNR Outreach, and today our guest is Emilie Justen. And Emilie works for the Department of Agriculture, and she's agreed to come in today and talk to us about poison ivy and noxious weeds. So if you need help with the multimedia viewer, go ahead and click those ellipses. If you want questions, go ahead and click the Q&A. And with that, Emilie, tell us a little bit about you and you can move right into your presentation.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, like Craig said, I work for the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and I've been with the Department of Ag for 12 years now. Prior to working at Department of Ag, I had a variety of different jobs. I have a horticulture background, and so I've done a lot of work with landscape plants and various other things where we grow plants. And when I took this job, I had to switch to thinking about growing plants to thinking about killing plants because our noxious weed program does the regulations of a list of plants that are deemed to be harmful to the state. And so I do a lot of training with people, with counties and landowners and various groups on what noxious weeds are, how to manage them, and what we can do to keep protecting our lands in Minnesota. So with that, oops, went too far. Our definition of noxious weeds is that it is the policy of the legislature to protect residents of the state from the injurious effects of noxious weeds. And those effects can be on public health, the environment, public roads, crops, livestock, and other property. So it's very broad in what what we're trying to protect in the state of Minnesota. There is a number of statutes that fall under the noxious weed law in Minnesota. I don't go into any kind of detail on those for this presentation. If you're curious, they are under 18.75 to 18.91. You could read those if you need a little light reading to help you fall asleep at night. They're not the most exciting of statutes, but they are what dictate a lot of my work that I do and a lot of work that we do at the Department of Agriculture under noxious weeds. So noxious weeds are growing plants. They are plants that cause harm to people, animals, food we eat, nature. So there's a number of different things that we do to try to keep those plants from harming people and other things. When we talk about noxious weeds, in particular with any of them that we call or that we consider toxic on this noxious weed list, I just like to always reiterate that if you are working or walking around any of these plants that might be toxic, to make sure that you do wear long sleeves, long pants, closed-toed shoes, gloves, particularly for managing. If you're doing any kind of management with any of these species that I talk about, you want to make sure that your skin's protected and that you're not exposing skin to any of the sap that might come out, for example. As a reference, you may want to look up the Minnesota Department of Transportation Noxious Weed Book. They do have digital versions of this book available online. It is going to be out of date after this year, and so although we've in the past printed a number of these books to send out to people, we're not doing another print run until next year when we have an updated noxious weed list. But it's a really great resource. It has all the species that are on the noxious weed list and a number of plant species that look like some of these noxious weeds as well. So they have great pictures. They have treatment timings or management timings for all these species as well. So it's a really great resource for a lot of people. So to jump into some of these toxic species, I wanted to start with the poison ivy, which is a native species that a lot of people may be familiar with, but it's pretty common throughout the state of Minnesota in lots of different areas. It has these 3 leaves on it as well. Um, some of the keys to ID that I think are important, it grows up to 3 feet tall. It has these compound leaves, and a lot of people may have heard the saying "leaves of 3, let it be," as a way to try to remember what poison ivy might look like. The other thing too about the leaves is that they are glossy and they have pointed tips. You can't see it on this picture because this is the one that is having some fall color. But they do have a pointed tip. And then later in the season, they do have these small grayish white berries that have a waxy appearance as well. The habitat, oops, sorry, I went too fast. The habitat that poison ivy grows in tends to be these woodland and savanna areas. I've seen it along a lot of fence rows as well, and rights of way, stream banks. So it has quite a variety of areas where it can grow. And I've seen it in all of these different areas as well. So I just am always pretty cautious when I'm out in the field looking for poison ivy so I don't step in it. So it does have some benefits. The berries, as a native plant, it does have the berries are a food source for some wildlife. So there are some benefits to that. However, for humans, it's really important to know that um, the the sap contains an oil and the leaves contain an oil or a toxic compound, and that compound causes blisters, rashes, swellings on human skin. Um, if you are a farmer and you bale hay, you should make sure that you're not contaminating any of that baled hay for cows and horses. And then that oil can get on clothes and gear, equipment, pet hair, and be spread that way as well. And then if you have been exposed to it, just make sure that you wash your clothes and footwear before uh, using any of those things again. So managing poison ivy, the biggest caution I would say about any kind of management is do not burn it. That oil can volatilize when it's burned, and people can inhale it and cause a lot of damage to your lungs. I have not experienced that, fortunately, but I have heard stories of people burning poison ivy inadvertently, not knowing that they had it, and having a lot of issues with that. You can mow it, but make sure to use caution if you're going to clean any of your equipment afterwards. Just remember that it's an oil that causes the rashes. So if that oil gets on other equipment or anything, it can spread. And then a broadleaf herbicide for woody plants can be effective as well. In my own personal experience with it, along with some fence lines, even a herbicide with glyphosate has worked pretty well. So that can be used as a spot treatment to make sure that you're killing the plant if that's your goal for managing it. The next one is wild parsnip, which a lot of people also may be familiar with. We get a lot of calls about wild parsnip and what to do about it and how to manage it. So people see it. It's very visible because it can grow pretty tall, and it's got these yellow flowers on it that uh, make it stand out when it's growing in ditches and along roadsides. Uh, excuse me. It does get tall, so it can get up to up to 6 feet tall. It has these egg-shaped leaves on it that are sawtoothed on the edges. Um, and then these compound yellow flowers on grooved stems. So that's kind of a lot of detail for what it looks like. But there is a native plant called golden Alexanders that people can sometimes mix it up with. So these kind of details on how to ID wild parsnip can help you if you think you might have the native golden Alexanders. The other thing too, just from a management perspective, is that it does form a thick taproot, which can make it pretty difficult to manage. It's really difficult to pull by hand. People can dig up or kind of use a spade to snap the roots for managing it too. But just know that it does have a taproot that makes it challenging as well. So mostly we'll see it and get complaints about it along roadsides. But as you can see here, this is a pretty wide looking ditch along a road where somebody's mowed through it. So disturbed areas, trails, natural areas, pastures, forest margins, all of those are ideal habitat for wild parsnip. And then it does have a number of impacts from an ecological standpoint. It grows pretty densely and can replace native species and native habitat. In an agriculture setting, it can reduce the quality of forage crops. It can negatively impact livestock if it's ingested as well. Although in my experience, like cows tend to avoid things that they don't find palatable, so they're pretty discerning. Cows, at least, are pretty discerning with not eating a lot of stuff that makes them feel sick. And then this also has a compound in it in the sap that is activated by sunlight. So it's kind of a little bit of a weird thing, but if you get the sap on your hand, for example, and there's sunlight, that exposure of the sap to the sunlight causes serious burns and blisters. And it's an actual chemical burn instead of it's like a chemical burn instead of a rash, and so it does blister and burn. And I first got it maybe 25 years ago, I think it was. I didn't know what it was, but this blister showed up on my hand, and my boss at the time said that it was probably wild parsnip, and I didn't know what it was and learned all about it. And it took about a year for that scar to go away from the burn as well. Like the poison ivy, you want to wash your clothes and footwear after contact as well, to make sure that you're getting any of that sap off of it. In general, we don't recommend hand pulling for this simply because there's a risk of getting sap on your skin. You can mow it, but be careful to make sure you're wearing a shirt, because I've seen pictures of people mowing without a shirt. And then what happened? They got burns all over their back from exposure to wild parsnip. But mowing can help. Repeated mowing can help. And for many years, it can help reduce populations. It's another one where you'd want to make sure to clean your equipment after mowing to prevent movement of the seed into new areas. And then a broadleaf herbicide in the early spring or late fall that targets those rosettes that grow at the base or grow at the ground, and newly bolted plants can also be pretty effective. Next we have poison hemlock, which, just based on the name, with the poison in the common name, tells you that it's probably not going to be good for you. Some ID characteristics: the stems are hollow and have ridges and purple spots. So there's not a whole lot of other plants that have these purple spots on them like that. The leaves are really fern-like as well. So that's another good indicator, good ID characteristic. And then when it's in bloom, it has clusters of these small white flowers that bloom from May to August. It also gets pretty tall. I don't have that on here, but it can get 6 or 8 feet tall as well. Its preferred habitats can be a number of different places: roadsides, pastures, stream banks, ditches. It does tend to like a little bit more wetter soils, like these ditches and stream banks. So this is along a railroad in this picture, but it does prefer some of those wetter soils as well. It is highly poisonous to humans and livestock if you're ingesting it. So you want to make sure not to eat it. Definitely don't dig up the roots and eat it or anything like that. It can grow in pretty dense patches and displace native vegetation as well. And then if you're going to be walking along it or doing anything with it, you want to make sure to keep all your skin covered as well. Managing poison hemlock, it's another one that can be mowed before seed set to prevent the movement of the seed to new locations. Broadleaf herbicide can also be applied as a spot or a spot treatment for it. And then cleaning equipment as well after any kind of mowing or any kind of driving through it or anything like that is a good practice to do. And then finally, for the different species today, I wanted to talk about a little bit about Japanese barberry. And there is a connection to, I believe, another webinar coming up with this one with ticks that I'll talk about a little bit at the end of this one. So Japanese barberry is, it's a woody shrub. It has really small leaves. It has spines on the stems. And then later in the fall, it's got these small red berries that are consumed by different animals as well. So it's very showy. Once the leaves fall off the branches, the berries stay on, and they show up really nice in the snow. They look really nice. They hold their color. The habitat for barberry, so this is started to naturalize in a couple different areas in the state. It was a plant that was used quite a bit in landscapes, and so a lot of people are familiar with it as a shrub that's growing in front of their house or somewhere along their property. So it has started to naturalize though in some wooded areas mostly in southern Minnesota, but we've seen it around in some parks around the metro as well. So it forms these really large thickets. And again, this is another one where somebody has mowed a path through this large thicket of barberry, but this kind of the area at the bottom half of the photo where it's all green, shrubby looking plants, those are all barberries. And they do leaf out earlier in the spring as well. So it's another one kind of like buckthorn that you might be able to see earlier in the spring when it starts to leaf out. So it has a number of impacts. Interestingly, to me at least, it can change the soil chemistry, and so that helps it outcompete a lot of other species, and it helps it suppress some species as well by changing the soil chemistry. It also forms these really dense thickets. The branches they kind of arch, and then if they touch the soil, they can put down new roots, and they have the ability to grow roots from the stems, so it kind of forms these really dense thickets that nothing else can really walk through. So once it gets to that point, it's pretty difficult to manage that. And then, like I mentioned earlier, there are a few public health concerns with Japanese barberry. It does create this microclimate with the ideal humid conditions for black-legged ticks, or also known as deer ticks. And those increased tick populations could lead to a lot more cases of tick-borne diseases. So a number of years ago, the Minnesota Department of Health got some funding from the CDC to do some tick drags along some areas in Minnesota to try to collect black-legged ticks and then test them for pathogens. And since we had a couple areas with these Japanese barberry infestations, I went out and helped do some tick drags in these areas to collect a lot of ticks. Not really maybe the highlight of my career so far, but it's kind of interesting. It was interesting. I did not get limes from this because I immediately washed all my clothes and took showers right away so that I could check for ticks. But what they found was that about a quarter of the black-legged ticks that we collected were carrying limes, and then there were a number of other pathogens as well, like completely blanking on them, but there were some other pathogens that these ticks were carrying as well. Uh, it didn't end up making any difference for how we managed those areas, and we didn't end up getting any funding or anything to try to get rid of the barberry, but it was interesting it was still interesting to know that there were more ticks and those ticks were carrying pathogens. To manage these barberry infestations, a lot of cutting and mowing and brush saws can be used, but it's not going to be the one thing that works. There has to be kind of a combination of mowing plus herbicide treatments. And then broadleaf herbicides for woody plants are effective. In some areas, if people are able to, a controlled burn might also be effective. I know Great River Bluffs State Park does a lot of controlled burns in their parks for buckthorn management, and it does do a really good job. But a, a landowner doing controlled burns would have to make sure you're following all the permitting that you need for your area. And then finally, there are a number of other what we consider toxic or harmful plants on our noxious weed list. I did not put details about these in this presentation because it's not likely, except for leafy spurge, that you'll really have much exposure to any of these. But Grecian foxglove is kind of around the Stillwater area. It's got digitalin in it that, if ingested, can cause problems to your heart, heart palpitations, things like that. Uh, and there's been some anecdotal stories of people's livestock and horses eating foxglove and having some problems with it as well. So be wary of that one. Black swallowwort's another one that has been shown to affect monarch caterpillars because the monarchs will lay the eggs on this particular species that's not native to the United States. And then those caterpillars will not be able to survive on this plant, even though it is in the milkweed family, but it's been shown to have decreased monarch populations. And then giant hogweed, which is this picture with the people in the Tyvek suit, is extremely toxic and dangerous. We do not have it in the state of Minnesota, so it's very unlikely you'll come across it, but it's very toxic. It's got the same kind of thing like the wild parsnip, where the sap causes burns to people. Johnson grass is another species more in the southern US, but we also don't think we have it in the state, but it's toxic to cattle. Leafy spurge is fairly common around the state of Minnesota. It's another one that can be toxic to cattle, but again, cattle are more likely to avoid it, I think, than to eat a whole lot of it and then get sick from it. And then the last one is yellow star thistle, which we also don't think we have in the state, but it does cause some issues for horses that eat it. It's got these really big spines at the base of the flower that causes problems if horses eat it. So with that, that is the presentation that I have for toxic plants. Here is my contact information if anybody wants to get a hold of me at some point. If you have any plant identification questions, you can always email me and send me pictures. That's one of the fun parts of the job over the summer is getting pictures from people to try to figure out what they have, and if they have something that might be a problem. So
Okay. Got a few questions, so make sure you put them in Q&A. This first question from Carl came in fairly early, so I think he's asking about poison ivy. Are all parts of the plant toxic, seeds, stems included?
I believe the I'm not sure about the seeds exactly, but the fruit and that waxy coating around the seeds would still have some of the oil in it. Um, Although I'm not sure if it's as toxic as the leaves.
Okay. And I spend a lot of time in the outdoors, and I have been exposed to poison ivy, but I've never reacted to it. So is it possible to be immune to poison ivy?
Yes, it is possible. You're one of the lucky ones. I am not immune to it. In fact, was exposed to it at one point, and then mango is in the same family as poison ivy, and the skin of the mango has a little bit of that same oil, and I accidentally rubbed part of the mango on my face, kind of only because I was like smelling it or whatever. And this was like not long after I'd had poison ivy, and my face just blew up. So I was already like allergic, and then my antibodies or whatever were like, "Oh no, this is more poison ivy.
Hmm.
We need to defend you." And I had to go on steroids for that
Wow.
because it was so bad. Yeah. So be careful with exposure to mango skins as well if you're already sensitive to poison ivy.
Uh, we had a question from Steele County. Hopefully you guys are able to figure out your slides. If not, these are all recorded, so you can probably come back and watch the recording as well. Um, Glenn says, just a little south of Iowa, poison ivy will climb as a vine, quite high into trees. The climate isn't that different from here. What's the difference between the poison ivy vine and the poison ivy plant?
So what I know is that there is a closely related species that does the vining, climbs as a vine. I would have to check to see exactly if I can't remember. I think it's a different species than the shrub form, or they're closely related and it's like a variety of the same species.
Mhm.
So basically, they're closely related. There's a couple different species of poison ivy. Some people call the vining one poison oak, I think. But there's some name kind of common name challenges with some of those too. So,
Mhm.
but I would
And
stay away from it if you see it. If you see the vine form climbing up something, I would also avoid that.
I have seen the vining one out in Virginia when we were out there. And I mean, it was growing to the top of a 40-foot tall gum tree. It was just kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Um, Steele County's still struggling with seeing the slides. Hopefully you guys got that figured out. Carl wants to know, is it true you can wash off the oil right away and it will not react?
That's a good question for exposure on your skin. I would say it depends on sensitivity of each individual. I'm not sure. I would consider myself sensitive, and I would probably just wash as soon as I can after being exposed to it. And I think I've also gotten it secondhand from a pet who was a dog that was running through it once too. So I think I'm pretty sensitive, so I try to be pretty careful about washing everything right away. it's probably just good practice to do that no matter what. But yeah, like Craig said, Craig's never gotten it, so he
Hmm.
he doesn't seem to have the sensitivity a lot of other people have.
Well, and if I'm working in the woods, cutting firewood or whatever, I'm usually wearing good heavy leather gloves, and I don't try to pick up things without the gloves on. So maybe that's why I've never gotten it, but I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, that's good
Um,
practice too.
Carl wants to know if wild parsnip is a non-native plant.
Yes, it is non-native. That's a great question. It's not native. What's interesting about it is that it is the same species as the cultivated parsnip that you eat, but the cultivated parsnip doesn't have the same um there's something was bred out of it that it doesn't have the same issues with the sap that you would have with wild parsnip. So it's confusing and odd, but wild parsnip is not native. So it does cause a lot of problems.
I'm thinking that Carl might be an Agatha Christie fan here. Does poison hemlock toxic to the touch or just ingesting?
There has been some anecdotes of people saying they've maybe had some reactions to the app getting on their skin. I have not come across any documentation of that happening like in a medical journal or anything like that. So,
Mhm.
but definitely if ingested, there are, it, I guess I just always, it, it's kind of, what's kind of weird about like exposure to skin is that just people can react differently. Like I sometimes get a rash from the leaves from a dogwood shrub. And so there's just lots of things people can react to. So if you have identified that you have poison hemlock and you want to pull it or something like that, I would wear leather gloves and just make sure that you're not getting any exposure on your skin just as a precaution.
Mhm.
But with the caveat that I haven't come across any like actual documentation that people have had reactions just from skin exposure.
Okay, Emily, she asked the question that I kind of thought up at the same time when I heard this, but what does it mean to change the soil chemistry, like the pH or nutrient level, or the type of soil like sand or clay?
So it would mean changing the not the type of soil like sand or clay, but whatever like the nutrients that are in it. And I would have to look up exactly what it is that barberry does or what exactly is getting changed. So I don't want to just say something off the top of my head, but yeah, it would be like some plants that are legumes will add nitrogen to the soil. For example, like soybeans or peas or whatever, they'll add nitrogen to the soil, uh,
Mhm.
and that changes the soil chemistry.
Mhm.
Like I said, I'm not sure what exactly the barberry is doing to change it, but there's something that it's adding to the soil that is making it more difficult for other species to grow.
Yep. William came up with an interesting question here. Are all the species discussed in all areas of the state, or are some of them localized?
That's another good question. Most of them are pretty well established all over the state. The poison hemlock is more in the southern part of the state, but there have been a few documentation of it a couple northern counties. And then barberry again is another one that's mostly in the southern part of the state, but there has been some, I think, around Duluth that we've documented. So the potential for all of these can be around the whole state. So they will grow. And then wild parsnip historically was in the mostly southern half of the state, but it has also been up. I want to say like Becker and Hubbard County now. So it's spreading further north too.
Okay. Sarah asked the question, is it possible to dig out the Japanese barberry?
Yeah, it is possible. If you have a few plants of it and you want to dig it out, it is possible. Uh, it doesn't have it has more kind of that fibrous root that stays closer to the surface of the soil, so it would be easier to dig out than something that's got like a tap root, like a tree that has a tap root or something like that. Um, People have used weed wrenches, they're called, to pull out buckthorns. I'm not sure if that would work necessarily because there isn't really a single stem for that weed wrench to grip onto. But you could try pulling it out with a, a chain and a four-wheeler or something like that if you really want to. But um, you should be able to dig it out if it's not too big fairly
Was
easily.
was barberry one of those plants that were advertised to help build a curtilage around a farm? You know, you got your big trees, you got your conifers, and then all of a sudden at the closest edge you put the barberry to keep the winds from coming through.
To my knowledge, I don't think that it was used as a windbreak the way honeysuckles were. Honeysuckles and Siberian pea shrub were used quite a bit for windbreaks. Barberries, I, as far as I know, were mostly a landscape plant.
Okay.
So I don't think, although I wouldn't be surprised if you did find it in some windbreaks.
Yeah. Glenn wants to know, how near is the giant hogweed and is it spreading closer?
There was some in northern Wisconsin over by the UP a number of years ago. I believe they, if not eradicated it, they have been managing it pretty extensively. So that's the closest one I know of. Um, it seems like every couple of years we hear about some news article from Pennsylvania or another eastern state where there's giant hogweed that shows up. And they've been managing, or when it shows up in one of those states, I just hear that they're managing it. So I don't think it's spread. It's pretty noticeable. So if it does show up, it's going to be something. I don't think we won't mistake it for something else, if that makes sense.
Okay. Jane wants to know, is there any poison oak in Minnesota?
That's a good question too. I don't know for sure. I'd have to I'd have to check and do some digging and probably talk to some either DNR botanists or somebody. Um, I've only seen poison ivy, but that doesn't mean poison oak's not out there.
Okay. Sandy wants to know, how long does the plant resin from poison ivy and poison parsnip stay viable on clothing?
Another good question. I don't know if I don't have an answer for how long the sap stays active. I think in my own personal experience, it can stay on clothing and be volatile for a while, a couple of weeks, I think, but don't hold me to that. And then, so So I would say it could probably last a couple of weeks still. The the parsnip is also a good question. I've heard people say that if they've used a spade or a shovel to dig up parsnip or cut at the parsnip roots, that the sap can still affect them even a couple of weeks after that. Like they've cleaned the shovel a couple of weeks later and gotten the sap from poison or from the wild parsnip on them, and then ended up getting some burns too. So
Mhm.
uh, it's probably safe to say a week or two for both.
Mary wants to know, is Palmer amagrath, not sure on the spelling or the name, toxic, and how much of a problem is it in Minnesota?
Palmer amaranth, that's a plant species that's on our eradicate list, and so it's a pretty bad um, weed in agriculture fields. Uh, it's not toxic, and actually the seeds are edible, but uh, at this point, there's been there's been a big push to get rid of it if it shows up in row crops in different areas. And so uh, I think it's been found in maybe 15 or 20 counties, but it's only still growing in maybe 10 of those counties or something like that. So it hasn't actually spread, even though it kind of keeps coming into the state with different avenues, if that makes sense. So not toxic, but a big problem or potential big problem to row crops.
So when we were talking in the green room, I told you about one of my first jobs out of college was to run the spray truck, and um, we sprayed all kinds of tansy. Some of it
Mhm.
was just along the roadsides. One farmer had a huge field that was taken over. And I seem to remember that tansy was toxic to pregnant horses.
Yeah, yes. You have a good memory. Yes, tansy, tansy is one of those that is toxic to, well, pregnant animals, because I want to, for some reason, goats and sheep stick out to me too, that it can cause miscarriages and things
Yeah,
in livestock
yeah.
if they eat it. So yeah, you don't want tansy in your pastures. I also did not include that one on this list. I think if people eat enough of it, it can be toxic to humans too, but that I think it's one of those that you'd have to eat quite a bit. And I don't think it's very palatable. So I don't know that people are just going to go out and eat a bunch of
And
tansy. But
Amber has added the Palmer amaranth and the tansy to our chat list. So if you want to go and look up those, you click on the blue link. Um, Joy wants to know, can vinegar spray be used to control poison ivy?
I personally have not used vinegar spray. I won't discourage you from trying it if you've got it in an area where you want to manage it. So I personally haven't used it, so I can't tell you if it would work for sure.
Hunter wants to know your thoughts on greenhouses and garden shops selling items that are toxic, such as castor and monkshood, etc.
Yeah, that's a good question, and we haven't really done any or much work to do outreach on what's toxic that's for sale, if that makes sense. At this point, there are no regulations for castor bean or monkshood, um, or lily of the valley, which would be another one that could be pretty toxic. And so that's kind of where Department of Ag stops, is if it's not a regulated plant species, then we don't really do much about it, I guess.
Okay.
And so, and I don't know. Yeah. So I think I would leave it at that. I guess, yeah, my personal take would also be that if it's not regulated, we probably would, there's not much we would do about it.
Looks like Mary's comment was until I got into some poison oak with blackberries, and the poison oak sap got into my skin via the thorns on the blackberries. Uh,
Ugh.
yeah, that just sounds like a really bad day. Um, so we're just gonna mark that we talked about that one. What can be used to effectively wash off poison ivy oil from clothes and shoes?
Just your regular detergent, laundry detergent, um, should be sufficient. If you're in the field and trying to wash it off, I'm not sure if there's anything that you could do just out in the field for that. I think washing it with detergent in a washing machine is probably your best bet.
Mm-hmm. Joel wants to know, are there certain herbivores that can safely consume poison ivy? Is this a viable management option? I've read about using goats to control brush. Would they consume the poison ivy plant too?
Goats eat a lot of things. They um quite possibly would eat poison ivy. Um I've seen goats that have been trained on eating buckthorn, and
Mm-hmm.
so they go they'll be put into a wooded area that has a lot of buckthorn, and they'll specifically choose buckthorn over other plants. So I don't know about if they could be trained to do the same thing for poison ivy or not. There are a number of goat rental companies around the state now in Minnesota, and so it could be something that you reach out to one of those goat rental businesses to see if they mm, a better idea of
Well,
if
you could
goats would eat
you
poison
could get
ivy.
into goat ranching too, just
Yep.
yeah, get your own goats. Um, William, he says, my dad thought he was immune to poison ivy and it never bothered him for many years. But one time he got a terrible case uh, of it. So if you think you're immune, I would still take precautions. And I usually try long sleeve shirts when I'm working in the woods, long pants. Yeah, we can deal with a lot of things out there just wearing the appropriate PPE, so to speak. Um, First part of my antidote never reacted to poison ivy or poison oak until, so Mary's had some exposure to that. And great news, Steele County got their slides up and working. So, Carl says a friend of mine was at a picnic. Poison ivy was nearby. The guy he said was not allergic. He rubbed his hands in it. Later they played softball. He was the pitcher, and everyone that touched the ball got it.
Oh no.
Did the pitcher get it? That'd be a good one.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, William's got another question here. I believe I caught poison ivy from the roots while digging for worms for fishing. Hmm. Um, Samantha, she says, to answer one of the earlier questions, there are two poison ivy species, and she put a big fancy Latin name in there. Toxio, well, we're not going to try and pronounce it, which is the eastern poison ivy, is more vine-like, not common in Minnesota. And the other one is, which is western poison ivy, which is common in Minnesota and doesn't appear as a vine. So there you go. There's two different types. Poison oak in Minnesota as a separate species.
Yeah, again, I'm not sure if poison oak is here or not. I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't, or if it is. I wouldn't be surprised if it is here.
Mm-hmm. I have a friend who could roll around in poison ivy when he was young, but then she became sensitive later in life. This created a horrible experience for her. So sensitive or not, it's best to be careful. I agree 100%.
So do I.
Jenny says, have you found a lot of poison ivy in the BWCA? Sorry, was having trouble with my webinar settings and might have missed it. Anything in the BWCA?
I'm guessing there is, yes.
Yeah. Is the root of the wild parsnip edible?
Yeah, it technically is edible. Uh, I've had some coworkers try it and they say it doesn't taste that great. So the parsnips you get from the store can be kind of sweet, or,
Mm-hmm.
I think they're pretty tasty. And
Okay.
I've even grown cultivated parsnips before that are really good. Um, but the wild ones are the roots can be they can be pretty long and they're not as thick, so they're not storing quite as much, I think, as the cultivated ones, but they just don't taste, they're kind of bland or something, bitter maybe a little bit too, but
Yeah.
they don't taste as good. They are edible though.
Bonita says, do you have a pick of wild parsnips and yellow mustard side by side to see? And we probably don't
Oh,
have that for this presentation.
I don't.
Does barberry host disease that affect white pines?
Barberry can be a host for a rust disease. I don't know if it is the white pine rust. I think, as far as I know, barberries are host for a rust for small grains, like for wheat. Um, so I don't think it's a host for the white pine blister rust.
Okay. Um, let's see. Tammy says the same plant family situation is so darn interesting. Are there other poisonous plants mentioned today related to food that we may eat or touch besides the managed poison ivy?
Um, it is interesting. Today, there aren't any other ones besides wild parsnip that would have other edible or related edible species. However, on the noxious weed list, we have wild carrot or Queen Anne's lace, and that is the same species as as our edible carrots, um, but it's gone or reverted back to its more natural, wild kind of
Mhm.
form. Um, and so wild carrot roots would also be edible, but again, that's another one that I've heard of people digging up and eating, and it just doesn't taste very good.
So we have a
Be
ton
careful.
of questions and only about 4 minutes to go here. So let's see. Andrew said web search states barberry adds excess nitrates that can leach into waterways, also rapidly depletes organic matter, also invasion of weedy plants. So that's just some extra information. This person, Mary, wants to know if Japanese barberry is, oh boy, allopathic, like walnut trees.
Allelopathic.
Yeah, there you go.
As far as I know, it's not, although I'd have to do a little bit, I'd have to dig and see if there is any research on that. Spotted knapweed is one that is allelopathic that people might be familiar with. And so it does send out chemicals through its roots into the soil that prevents other plants from growing.
Barb had an interesting comment that she's gotten, I'm assuming, poison ivy from carrying wood, confirmed by the doctor. So that lasted who knows how long on that bark of the
Yeah,
firewood,
right.
you know.
Yep. Yep.
I was surprised not to see stinging nettles on this presentation. One encounter with was a lesson for me, and it's toxic to livestock too.
hmm
Does it have to be full sun to react to parsnip or any daylight?
It is sunlight, although I think if it's like cloudy but kind of bright, people can still have a reaction to it.
Okay. Elizabeth said Japanese barberry is alternative for wheat rust. So I'm not sure. I'm not going to second guess it. Let's see here. Carl says he thinks goats will eat it. So there you go. People react to poison ivy is an allergy that most people have. People can develop allergic reactions to pretty much anything, anytime. And I would agree with that. I've got a nice cedar stand behind me, and I cut some cedar for some fence posts off our property. And I had such a horrible reaction to the cedar. It just, yeah. Carl said the pitcher did not get poison ivy, but everybody that touched the ball did. Goats are immune to toxic compounds in poison ivy. It's from Doug. And I was surprised not to see stinging nettles on this one too. Let's see here. Oh, this one says goats on the go.com. You can probably search that out yourself. Poison oaks in the BWCA. I think cashews are related to something that's toxic, but I don't remember what. Do you know what cashew nuts are related to?
They're also in the same family as poison ivy and mango. However, I think cashew nut is surrounded by like a fleshy thing, like fruit thing. So I think it's like the skin and the flesh of that goes around the cashew nut that would have the same oil in it.
Okay.
As far as I know, the nut itself doesn't have the oil in it, but
So if you enjoyed today's program, tune in next week, and we're going to have a TikTok, not the social media TikTok, but we're going to talk about the 3 main ticks in Minnesota. And so sign up for that one if you're interested. Thank you so much, Emilie, for coming in today. And we got through all of our questions.
We did. Woohoo!
Yeah, well, we did. So anyway, Amber, if you can take us back to the green room.